Chris and I are going to talk about some API versioning, gateway, and Chris will get into the AI enablement. He's got some pretty cool stuff to show. Yes, I just said that, didn't I? So we're going to also talk about OpenAPI. Folks here are familiar with OpenAPI a little bit? Okay, good.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really want to delve into, though, is that the specifications can actually help you in your development process. And actually also, we can make specification generation and also how to leverage those inside of your Spring Cloud Gateway and Spring Cloud overall and your clients to make it much better for you as a developer and providing solutions.
So introduction for those that don't know me, my name is Spencer Gibb. I have been on the Spring Cloud team. I started Spring Cloud with Dave Sire 12 years ago in June. I can't believe it's 12 years. I've been on the same project ever since, doing the same thing. Spring Cloud, that's me. There are my socials. At the end, I will put a link to my demo GitHub repo, so you can take a picture of that at the end. And how long have I worked with you?
11 years.
Has it been? Okay.
Yeah.
Almost the whole time.
Almost the same time. So I'm Chris Sterling. I started out with Pivotal back in the day and now with Broadcom through acquisitions. And one of the interesting things was, when we talk about Gateway, was there's one day, I think it was like 2017 or 16, somewhere around there, he comes to me and shows me this cool API Gateway solution. I'm like, whoa, this is amazing. I can actually program my own gateway all of a sudden. And I started to think about different things. And I'm a product manager, technical product manager. I actually am a coder as well. I've been developing since the 90s in Java. So it was actually called Oak when I first started with it.
Yeah, you've got a few more years on me.
Totally accidental, by the way. I just happened upon it by some other developer who was doing C++.
Java 1.2 for me.
Oh, yeah. So I started at 1.0. We had exception handling by numbers.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Anyways, my focus is really how do we take this and make it easy for everyone to kind of use and make it simpler to program with. So.
Did you want to?
Oh, yeah. So there's a lot of great talks from some of the Tanzu team here at Broadcom that are at this conference. So if you want to check it out, most of them are in this room, but there's also some other ones outside. And on top of that, we got some really cool cards, all right? So come up to us afterwards and let me take a picture of your badge. I'll be the bad guy that does that. And then take some of these cards. We're contractually obligated to get rid of these, all right? So come up afterwards.
All right, so we're going to start with a little intro to API versioning. Anybody doing this at their job? Like a lot of you? Great. It's an interesting piece of designing and developing an API, right? Like, it's all about change management, basically, right? Like, how do you deal with a change, right? When, depending on who your clients are, right? They could be public, they could be other parts of your business. And how do you communicate with them and let them know there's new things, and how do you maintain backwards compatibility, right? It's hard. And you could always do it in Spring, right? You just kind of have to do it by hand. And so it's not always been the easiest thing to do. And you can think of it as a spectrum. And on the one end, like, you're just never going to change. It's always compatible, right? But it's very difficult. The approach that we've taken in Spring is basically kind of a lightweight, iterative way of managing change, whether that's by header or query parameter, media type, or a whole new thing, right? Like basically a new website, if you will, right? Whether that's by host or by path, right? Like a new path is basically a new thing, right? And that's kind of the nuclear option there is you do it by path. And do you version? Do you build it in? Right? It's kind of hard to do that because you don't know. It's like, how am I going to change? How is the API going to evolve? Well, you don't know until you get users submitting bugs or asking for enhancements, or part of the business, hey, we need this, and how do we deal with that? One of the things in Spring Cloud that we have is a config server, and this is a thing that gives you dynamic configuration for all your instances at runtime, and Ryan will attest to this. Like, we needed to make a change to the format of the data, and so we basically hand-rolled API versioning, and Ryan, we never did it. Like, we never went back and put in framework support for this so we could rip out our hand-rolled stuff, but we didn't know what it was going to look like, so how do we version it? And it's much easier when you're doing a header or accept, in the media type. And so when we talk about API versioning, we're going to do, in Spring, it can be very granular, right, by endpoint. If you want to get more of a deep dive into API versioning, that's my talk tomorrow, and I go through everything, like how to use every type of versioning and how to configure it, whether it's in properties or Java config or testing with it, all the clients and everything. So if you want a deep dive into API versioning, tomorrow 10 a.m., I don't remember the room. So basically we do it endpoint by endpoint, right? One endpoint can be one version, a different endpoint then can be a higher version, and we'll show a little bit of that. And it's baked into the framework now. Rossen Stoyanchev, who's a framework developer, it was brilliant how he came up with the way to do it. It's pretty slick. It's out in the wild, right? Like, even if you're not doing it, some of the APIs that you might consume are doing it, right? And if you go look at these links, like, I think I can. Microsoft has a very interesting way. Make it a little bigger here for you. Oh, it scrolled all the way down, didn't it? That was weird. No, okay, let's just reset. They can do it by URL or query parameter. I've never, super odd. Some people do it by date, right? Some do some kind of semantic versioning. I've seen a combination of date and semantic version. Like, it'd be pretty crazy what people come up with. So on the server side, whether you're using Webflux or WebMVC, whether you're using annotations or the functional bits, we support it whatever way you're going to be using. I'm going to be showing, still going. I'm going to be showing today functional WebMVC because the MVC gateway is built on that, but I'll show other things in tomorrow's talk. Also on the client side in Spring, you can support versioning with REST client, with web client, with the HTTP service clients. They changed the name. It's not interface clients anymore. Mm-hmm. You can set defaults and everything, and it's really nice because now you have an API to set the version in Java, and then framework decides, based on Spring Boot configuration, how to send the version, whether it sends a header, whether it sends a query parameter, when it sends a media type, like, it figures it out for you. So it's really, really nice that way. All right, so there were a few hands that showed OpenAPI. We talk about it a little bit. So I'm actually fairly new to OpenAPI and really enjoyed learning about it. I've wanted to do something we've talked about it for, I don't know how many years, for a long time. But it's a specification to describe your APIs. Really, really nice because then you can communicate to your clients what this API looks like, how it behaves, what is even available. Have So having developed a gateway, one of my favorite websites is HTTP bin. If you've never heard of this, it's brilliant you send it a request and it spits back what you sent it, and it's got all sorts of things. But this is, given a spec of OpenAPI, you can create something that looks like this, and you can then go and test this API out, right? We can run a Git here. Depending on how you have things configured, and then we get the response. Sorry, I'll make it a little bigger so you can see. So the app I developed, I started with HTTP bin and then moved on. But it allows you to describe all sorts of things, from just the shape of the data that it needs, the shape of the data that it will send back to you, security, what else can you... There's all sorts of different bits that you can...
Headers that you might get responded with,
Yep.
Parameters that you need to provide, all kinds of fun things.
It will describe the entirety of the HTTP request and response back to you. It's really, really nice, and I don't know, majority of our customers want and use this?
We've seen over the past few years that there's a lot more exchanges that are kind of resource to resource. And they're finding that, and team to team, and of course, ever-expanding number of teams and ever-expanding number of applications, they're finding that this is the way that they at least get an idea of what their API landscape looks like. And then we go to a lot of customers and they say, well, we have OpenAPI specs for like 100 APIs, but we probably have 9,000 APIs. And so we see it still incrementally getting adopted across the board.
Here's a partial example of a file. I would say that most people choose to do code first. So you write some code. In our case, it's Spring. And then based on your controller, it will generate this spec for you. If it doesn't have enough information, you can annotate it and add more information that will show up in the spec. I think there's, typically when code gets generated, it's not typically server code, it's typically a client, right? Like you're going to create a Java client to go call this thing, and so here's the spec, and it will just spit out a client for you, and you don't even have to write that.
I think, though, that what's interesting also on that is we see a combination of both. In a greenfield project, you probably see a lot more code first because you're not quite sure what the API is going to look like yet.
Interesting.
In many cases, unless you're making something that's going to be like a billable API outside, you might want to have that more spec first. But then after that, I see as a product manager, sometimes I'm taking the existing API and I'm saying, okay, we want to make an enhancement. What does that new API look like? Or what are the transitions that we need to make, and what's the backward compatibility look like? In that case, this API versioning that came out in Spring Boot 4 really is kind of a really nice addition. It makes it easier for me to get a solution for that.
So I'll be talking about, part of my demo, we'll be using Spring Doc, which is it's exactly what it sounds like. It is OpenAPI integration for Spring. Below is one of the ways that you can add it to your project, but it will read the annotations or functional metadata, which I'll show. It includes the Swagger UI that you see on the right there that I showed you with HTTP bin. I've been working with one of the maintainers and finding bugs as I was creating this demo. I'm actually using a snapshot because we're iterating through some things, and so great project to work with.
Yeah, and although it's not one of the main Spring projects, I have to say when it comes to the API space, they really do have what I think is the most capable library that helps you with OpenAPI and integration.
So I'm not going to do, so how many have seen Josh Long talk, right? A few of you. He's a speed expert live coder. I'm not Josh, so I'm not going to live code, but I am going to show you how I started this project, right? We recognize this. Does anyone know what Josh calls this site? It's his second favorite place on the internet, right? What's his first? Production, that's right. So start.spring.io, if you have indigestion, start. Anyway, So in this case, what we've used is Spring Web.
And make sure you're on 4.0.
Yeah, if you're using Gateway and then
Spring Boot 4.0.
Spring Dock, right? It's on, and if you go look, these are the, so I'm not going to actually build a project, I've already got one. So let's start with, everybody see that? All right, that's good sizes and stuff. I'm going to just show you a quick demo here. So this is just kind of a vanilla application, right? It's got, this is a user API. So this is an example, this is a test app from Spring Dock. And you can see I'm using the webmvc.fn DSL. This is by path, obviously, right? We can see the versions in here. Basically, there's a field difference between these two classes. It should already be up and running. So if I pop back here, so one of the things that you get with Spring Dock here is that descriptive. Here it is, right here, right? It tells you the paths, what operations are available, in this case get, what a response looks like, and then it points to the schemas, right? So there's a couple different of them. Version 2 has a first name and last name, where version 1 just has a name, okay? You can also enable the Swagger UI. It's not enabled by default because you don't want it on, probably don't want it on production. I guess there are certain cases where it could be. So you can disable that if you need it.
Actually, let me ask a question. For those of you using OpenAPI, how many of you have like a developer portal or something like that where your APIs get exposed? So I see one person. Oh, there's quite a few.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, and is that developer portal, you find it like a place where you go often to find other APIs that you can leverage, or is it more of a kind of just something you do? Yeah.
So here is the version 1 response. You can see it's just name. If I come down here and run, or up, where is it? Yeah, run version 2. There we get first name, last name. So this is just an individual service. There are 2 versioned endpoints on here. You can see how we did the version, right? So this is built into Spring Cloud. We told it this is version 1, and we have it configured. This is configured using Java config. So in this case, the version is going to be in path segment 1. It's 0 based, right? So path segment 1, 0, 1. So the version's in the second spot there. And a few other options here. If we have a default, we don't need a version. You could send it without anything and you'd get version 1. So, but this is a service, right? Like typically, even if you're not doing microservices, you probably have more than one, right? You probably need something in front of it. So that's where Spring Cloud Gateway comes in. So I have another project here with the WebMVC server. And this one's a little bit different. Come on here, where's my... So here we have, we'll kind of skip that. This first route is for convenience, working on localhost cores, cross-origin stuff. So just ignore the first route. Hand wavy. So we have, so I decided that maybe in the evolution of your application, you don't want to do path-based, right? You want to not have that version number in the header. So I thought that'd be an interesting thing to show here using Gateway. So we just have /users, okay? And in in this application, where's my route config? Right, there's a handler here, right, which eventually comes down to a service, right, that actually calls this, right? So takes in a request, returns a response. In Gateway, we don't have that. This HTTP is the proxy function that does that for you, right? This is the bit that is specific to OpenAPI here. And what I'm actually doing here is referencing the remote Swagger spec. So I'm kind of doing some aggregation of, it's not perfect, but it is a start. But that's not what the path is for that service, right? So what we're doing here is changing the path from what it was originally. And then I'm also adding response header just so you can see something different when we come back. And then this is the version 1. So if we start this guy up, I come back to the browser. So here we are. This is the Swagger spec for the gateway, and you can see that Chris opened an issue in Spring Doc to support API versioning, and it will read beans in Spring to determine what it is, and it says, oh, you're doing a header, and so it automatically creates this parameter object in the spec. So if we go to the Swagger UI, I only have one endpoint, it's users, but then when I go to try it out, you pick a version. So if we execute version 1, you can see it sent the header, and we got back the version 1 that only had the single name, and then we got back the header that I set as a response filter there in Gateway. So if I do it again with version 2, you can see we have that. The other thing that I've done is used, so webabc.fn has the concept of filters, a couple kinds. Before, a full filter which can do before and after, or just after. So I have this LB filter here, which is load balancing. So I have one of my dependencies is Spring Cloud Load Balancer, which if you have something like Consul or Zookeeper or Eureka, or maybe you're on Kubernetes, it can read where your instances are registered and automatically use an algorithm to choose which one to do. I have simply used properties to tell it where that instance is. And here you can see I just use some arbitrary piece of metadata to, like, again, this is for cross-origin. I wouldn't need that if we were on a real domain with anyway. But yeah, so this can basically do some OpenAPI aggregation at the gateway level. Exactly, yeah. Typically, folks who use Gateway have some kind of service discovery mechanism. It might be that it just points to delegate to the Kubernetes ingress router, for example, or something like that, or a Kubernetes service. We have users that run the gamut. So this is what I figured out last night. It was pretty slick. So I think that is everything from my side. That is my demo. The demo gods were good today.
In that example, how would you define different filters that need to be applied? So you're just looking at the Swagger. Is there something about the Swagger that says, by the way, this needs to be validated?
I don't think there's an official way to do that, but you could put metadata in there that you could read. So here, let me real quick plug back in.
Yeah.
So if I come back to this application, you can see I have this git ref, and basically I'm using this load balancer client is a abstraction from Spring Cloud that says, hey, get me an instance, in this case users, and then I get this metadata, right? So the piece of metadata that I showed you in the properties here, I end up getting from this. So you could potentially use some metadata here to programmatically add some filters if you wanted. But I don't think there's a official way to do that through Spring Doc, is there?
No, there isn't. So,
But you could have metadata in there. I think you can even put metadata in the OpenAPI spec if you wanted.
yeah.
that
So
you could
there's
read.
some different annotations I believe you can add to metadata, but the filters themselves are really, you're applying them at runtime.
Yeah.
And that's going to be something I'm going to talk about next.
Yeah,
I
so
think.
let's get him plugged in here.
Yeah. I think I'm ready. Oh, I need the little adapter. Do we have an adapter?
Oh, you don't have a HDMI?
I do not.
Yeah, you do.
Oh,
right
I
there.
do? Oh.
Yeah. What are you talking about?
I don't know what I'm talking about. All right, we'll see if this works. All right. So now we have the underlying Spring Cloud Gateway. We've got Spring Cloud Load Balancer. We've got Spring Security, all these different parts of the ecosystem within Spring. And what was interesting is obviously Spring Cloud Gateway allows you to do kind of the functional traffic routing and some of the filtering, headers and HTTP kind of information. But some of the other things that you really want to do with an API gateway, right? Because there's network gateways, but then you go a level up, you got this API gateway. It needs to understand APIs. And APIs are actually embedded within the overall HTTP content, right? So how I request and respond. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was, this is back in 2017, we released the first version of Spring Cloud Gateway on VMware Tanzu. Well, I guess back then it was Pivotal Cloud Foundry.
Yeah.
It's come a long ways. And since then, we've done quite a few interesting things. Today, we have Tanzu Platform. And with Tanzu Platform, it does so many things. It's a platform as a service. And what it allows you to do is deploy any of your types of applications, whether they be modern applications, that could be your regular web application that needs a URL, and also it could be Gen AI or agentic workflows. So you can deploy all of these onto the platform. And then we have these services that you can bind to. So what we do is we expose the API gateway, which is based on Spring Cloud Gateway and all the other Spring ecosystem projects, as a service. And you create a service instance from, and then you bind your app to it in order to do things like get networking and then expose my OpenAPI endpoints onto the gateway dynamically. Now, the reason why we did that is because what we found with a lot of customers is usually they don't have only one app, or they might have one app that exposes an API, but sometimes what they do is they want to aggregate my custom app with some Salesforce APIs with something else and then expose that as one API to their customers, whoever their customers are. So you usually get some kind of API aggregation, or you want to do some sharing across different BUs. And so what are the ways that we can do that and provide security around that, rate limiting, et cetera? So we wanted to put that into the platform. And what we're going to show off today is some of the cool services we have, including AI, obviously as a buzzword of the day, and it is highly impactful. I as a developer myself, even though I'm a product manager, I've been coding over the last couple of weeks with Cursor, and I've seen a marked difference over the past 6 months of the kind of code that it can develop and put into my repo and the things that I can do with it. So definitely, if you're not already getting involved with Claude Code or Cursor or whatever it might be, you got to jump on board and try this out, because it's a totally different experience than I had even 6 months ago, where I was a little bit more pessimistic. Now, there's also a bunch of marketplace services, whether you need like a Postgres database or you need some MySQL or whatever it might be, but also one of those is Gen AI services. So I can actually give you a model always with an OpenAI compatible API for the modalities that it supports, right? And so the idea here is that now my application can be written in one way. I can change out the model later because there's a better model, because there's always a better model than yesterday. And I can focus it on using that new model without any code changes. And then you've got the elastic runtime underneath all this, the PaaS. It's actually managing the lifecycle of my application. And also the bindings I have to these other services. Now, in this particular case, what does API Gateway look like on the platform? Well, of course, any device can connect. What you do is when you do what's called a CF push, you push your application, it gets a URL immediately. So it's usually some domain name with whatever name or subdomain that you want underneath that, okay? And once you have that URL, you can actually also create your API gateway with single sign-on, rate limits, all kinds of fun things at the global level. And then you can do something after you bind your applications to them. You got your microservices there, maybe written in Spring Boot 4, hopefully. And they actually have some API versioning supported. And they might be using Spring Doc OpenAPI. Now with those, I can actually bind my application to the API gateway, and also my microservices, I can push without an externally mapped domain or route. So nobody can access that app directly. And then I expose it through the API gateway, and I say, hey, I want you to expose me in a way that I like with this prefix of /API or /whatever in front of it, and route the traffic that matches that over to my application when you get it at the gateway. And so I can dynamically do that on the gateway and say, yes, you route that kind of traffic to me, then I'll handle it from there. And then I'll respond back through the gateway to the client application. So no client directly talks to your microservices. This is very helpful with brownfield. I don't know about you, but I've been around for a long time. I went through the XML years. I've been through even before there was XML. Anybody remember Corba? Mm-hmm. Oh, EJBs. Yeah, I did a lot of CMP, BMPs, messaging beans and all that stuff. Okay, so APIs have changed a lot over the years. REST came along and it was like, wow. And then JSON, JSON everywhere, even before REST. You probably have some brownfield applications that do something different than what you would do today. Okay, different standards that they provide. But through a gateway, an API gateway, now you can expose those in a very consistent manner to clients. And that's very important here. Now, how does it work? I think, Spencer alluded to this, but if you look at how the Spring Cloud Gateway works underneath the covers, it really has the handler mapping, which evaluates predicates. So a predicate is, how do I match the appropriate route for the request that's coming in? And you can have any number of routes that are registered with the gateway, and it's going through that list and trying to figure out which one should I actually use. First one that it comes to that matches within an ordered list, it will actually use that one, and now it'll route the traffic based upon that predicate to the route. Now, then it can go through some pre-filters, right? Because you can create a filter that's either on the request or on the response. You filter it, send it off to whatever the app is or the proxied service, and then it comes back through on the post request filters, and then it goes back to the client, okay? Now, the nice thing about this is that all of a sudden you can actually leverage a whole bunch of different things within your app and deploy it to the platform, including integration with GenAI, right? Because I see GenAI as a lot different than if you were using predictive analytics or something of this nature, right? GenAI is this more foundation model exposure where I have a lot more non-deterministic workflows. But the idea here is that I still want to be able to leverage that in behind my API. And the GenAI service is something that we provide out of the box, so I can have any number of models, say here's the plan that represents GPT OSS versus I don't know, Olama or whatever it might be. And I can expose that to my app as an OpenAI compatible API. So let's go ahead and do a demo really quick where I show off the API versioning and the models. So I have this really cute application, okay? And I have need to add some chat because everybody needs some AI, right? We need to throw some AI on top of every application that we have. And what I've done over here is I've actually started a conversation. You'll notice up at the top, it says I still need to sign in. So I've come in as an anonymous user, and I started chatting. Now, after I started chatting a little bit, something happened. I got a rate limit. So all of this is going through an API gateway at some point. So if I look at what the underlying architecture is I've got Tanzu platform that exposes a URL, okay? And I've got my browser traffic coming through, and the first thing it hits is the API gateway. The API gateway actually has a rate limit that is for the route when you're anonymized, and the rate limit's obviously much lower number of requests that you can provide for any time span than if you were authenticated, okay? I'll show you how that works in just a moment. So once it gets through the API gateway, well, first off, if you get a rate limit, like the whoa chatterbox, you're talking too much, you gotta log in if you wanna talk more to me. In order to get that response at the bottom there, I hit a 429 response, which is the default response that anybody who hits a rate limit gets, along with the number of milliseconds before you can try again as a header in the response. So I've hit that through the API gateway. But if I get through, what's interesting is I actually have 3 different applications sitting behind the gateway, and I'm using a back-end for front-end type of architecture. So the front end is React.js. It's a static set of files that get loaded up into the browser, right? But they go through the API, or the API gateway. The nice thing about that is you get rid of the cores problem that he was just having, right? When you work local. And by the way, I can run this local and I have the cores problem, so I have all these web configs just to figure out all that. But also on top of that, I can actually hide all of those back-end services in behind it. So nobody can hit the front end without going through the API gateway. They get pushed without an externally mapped route. They just become a container on the platform, and until I bind it to the API gateway, there's no network traffic that can get to it. Even from the platform, even the chat server can't talk to the front end because there's no ability to run traffic between them. There's no network. Now, we also have the chat server and backend. The chat server is actually running Spring Boot 3.5, okay? And it's using Spring AI, the GA release, and it actually has a binding to the Gen AI service. So when I go into in the chat window over here, I'm connecting to /chat/ something, right? And that's all getting routed traffic to the chat server. And then it's going to the model as needed. But not only that, there's the backend API, and the backend API is Spring Boot 4. This has API versioning on it, so we'll show that in just a moment as well. And it is also an MCP server. So it has some APIs, but you also want to expose those as MCP tools for local interactions. And so what I've said is I've actually set up a network access. I've added network access between the chat server talking to the backend, only to get the tools that it can use alongside the model interactions that's going to have. Anybody not familiar with Model Context Protocol? Is this the first time you're hearing about it? Okay, good. Nobody raised their hand, or nobody's willing to raise their hand. All right, so MCP is really nice, give you tools, works alongside your model so that you can give it very specific deterministic outcomes, okay? So let's give an example of that, see what some traffic looks like. So what cats are available to adopt? Okay? It's thinking. Now what's interesting on the back end, it's actually going to go and because it knows it has some tools available, it's going to actually go to the back end and it says, oh, you're asking about cats. They may be in the adoption list of animals. And so I'm going to go and actually ask for the tools to get all the animals, and then I'm going to figure out which ones are cats. Okay? So down here, it came out with all the cats that are available, and I say, hey, show me a pic of, let's see, whiskers. And it'll try to figure out I spelled it wrong, but I'm sure it'll figure it out. There we go. Yes, it did. The model's very smart. Okay, there's whiskers. How cute is that, right? So all of a sudden, I've actually made a chat interface with my APIs. So let's look at some code that's lying in behind this. All right. So our API gateway configuration, so when you create a new service instance on the platform, you actually do something called CF create service. But in order to create service, before we do that, I'll actually show you the marketplace. So we actually have a bunch of different services that you can get, but it'll be too long for you to see everything, so I'm going to make it a little smaller. One of the services that you have is a P.gateway. And in that, there's a plan called standard. In order to create a new gateway, I would do CF create service, and I would say, okay, I want a P.gateway, standard, plan, and then I name it like my gateway, right? So in the background, what's going to happen is actually going to create a new gateway. I usually wouldn't do this. I would pass the -c option to a JSON config, because I actually want to give my gateway a little bit of information about what it needs to do. So one of the first things that it does, and this is not available in the open source, is it has a single sign-on plan. So now operations can actually create single sign-on plans, maybe hooked up to Okta or whatever different identity provider that they want, and then I just reference it as a plan. And I say, hey, use the UAA plan in this case. That's what we have on this platform. But it could have been Okta or it could have been anything else. And then I'm also saying, well, how many instances of the gateway should I have? Well, for HA, I should always have 2 at least, probably 3. And that's backing applications that are running in the background, and they're actually using an in-memory data grid to share session state across them automatically for you. So that's some HA stuff that you have to start to think about. So I've got security, I've got high availability, and then I'm also giving it some interesting information about OpenAPI. So what APIs are going to be exposed on this gateway? Well, these are the animal rescue APIs and some description about them. This will look very familiar to anybody who's looked at an OpenAPI spec. These are the metadata that goes up at the top, right? And then on top of that, what about if there's an error for a 404, where should I route them? Things like that. So there's error routing and other things I can handle at a global set, a scale. But then if I look at the chat server, you'll see something interesting. So I told you I have the anonymous rate limit and I have the authenticated rate limit. So in the anonymous rate limit, which is the one at the bottom, there are 2 different routes exposed here. They both go to post/chat. So they both have the same method, the same endpoint, right, the path. But the difference is that one of them actually has a predicate that says the header X authenticated true must be present in order for this route to be matched. And its order is 0. And then the second one is order 10, and it doesn't have that predicate. The second one is the unauthenticated, the first one's the authenticated. The rate limit for unauthenticated is 2 requests every 60 seconds. Whereas if you're authenticated, I'll give you 2 requests every 10 seconds, okay? So I've actually made this so that I can actually handle that situation more effectively, and I don't get somebody's, maybe a bot entering my site and just running chats and DDoSing my site or my model, okay? Now, when it comes to API versioning, I also have done this as well, where I have actually created, before I used to just list all the animals, but then I got too many animals, okay? So all of a sudden I had this feature request from the product manager who said, hey, we need pagination. So we added a pagination API endpoint, a brand new endpoint, but it's at the same path. I wanted it at the same path as the old one, which was /API/animals. But when you hit header API version 2.0, right, all of a sudden now it's going to give me the new paginated version. So my front end now can call it with the appropriate header, and it will do the right thing in terms of giving me a paginated list. Give me the first 3, And if you look here now, all of a sudden, if you look, we have a load more. So I can paginate and get more animals, okay? So that was added. And I've done the versioning here on the front end. And on top of that, what the API gateway does out of the box is it will generate an OpenAPI endpoint. So what I've done on the API gateway is I've aggregated APIs from multiple applications. I've also added on single sign-on and rate limiting. And I also have API versioning. So now what will happen is they'll say, oh, you had rate limiting on the /chat endpoint. Here we go. This is actually the response that you could potentially get from that endpoint if you hit the rate limit. Okay, a 429 along with the time in milliseconds until retry. Okay? So what's nice about this is all of a sudden I've auto-generated this based upon not what was in the application originally, but because the API gateway decorated it with filters that then get into the OpenAPI spec automatically for you. On top of that, if we look at the API animals, there we go. We also have the same thing there. We have a rate limit. And it's very consistent now, no matter what my backend app is. It boot 3, 5, 4, you know, some of us might be on struts. Who knows, right? Yeah, I made him like, ugh. Yeah. But back in the day, struts was pretty cool. I remember that. It was a fun thing to do. All right. So you have OpenAPI generated documentation automatically. Pretty much you do that through what we call a service broker, and it knows how to read out the information from a gateway, an API gateway instance. So you're not actually hitting any problems of causing issues with your API gateway because you're calling this. You might have your developer portal hit this service broker, and it will display this OpenAPI spec to your other users who may be other teams in your organization that want to see your API. And you didn't have to do anything in terms of adding Spring Doc or any of those kind of things. Now, one of the things I think is very cool also though, if you haven't done this already, I actually just asked Cursor, hey, can you describe the architecture of this current application or set of applications for me and put it into some kind of structure that I can then document. And I've been updating this over multiple versions. So I have this new architecture document. You saw this familiar diagram, automatically generated mermaid. And I also said, you know, what are the characteristics of security concerns that I really should, that I get from a local version versus on platform version? And he was able to really describe that in much more detail. I find that useful to then go back and say, is there any design issues that I should be looking at? Are there any potential holes? I even asked the cursor, hey, is there things that I should be thinking about that I'm not thinking about today in terms of the security around these endpoints? One other thing I wanted to show. Oh, first off, I want to show you the single sign-on. So let's log in. All of a sudden, one of the other things is that I have to log in to actually set up a pet adoption request. And therefore, it wouldn't allow me to set up an adoption without going in here. So can I adopt Brody? Oh, it's saying, yeah, can you please share your email address? And let's get started. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and do that. Chris@example.com. It says, great. Hey, do you have a short note that you want to share as well? Very cute dog. All right. So all of a sudden what it's doing now, it's actually calling the MCP tools and it says which ones are available for me. And if I look at the code for the chat server, Oh, wait, not that one. But look at the chat service when it's calling the system prompt. The system prompt actually has quite a bit of information in it. I'm directing how I should leverage any of the tools, along with some other things. So it says, hey, these tools are available from the back end. It really doesn't say where, but they're available because you're an MCP client as an application to some MCP server somewhere. And we set that up in the configuration. And it says, here's what an adoption flow looks like. I set up the system prompt with the adoption flow. I'm just using Spring AI here, right? And I'm using MCP client with Spring AI. So it says, hey, ask for their contact email. And also if they'd like to add any notes. It's optional though, okay? And then call the adopt animal with the gathered information. So adopt animal is one of the tools, right? And then, pending adoption flow. So I actually want to see who my competition is. So who else is interested in Brody? Oh, it's just me. Fortunately, I'm going to get this dog, right? This is mine. So all of a sudden, I actually have said, hey, what is it that I need to do when somebody asks about the pending adopters? Not that we should probably do that. It's probably a PII violation right there or something, right? And then some important information about, that you have to sign in order to call some of these tools. You can't just call them directly. And also on top of that, be conversational and friendly. So there's a lot of things in here I could put in my system prompt to help it act accordingly that I wanted to act, right? So all of that is using chat and string information, right? Probably not the best way. I would enhance this over time to use more process flows, probably look at things like Enablement to do the planning of how to interact with the different tools. So there's definitely some things I can do to make this more deterministic than it even is today. Okay. Let's see, so then if I go back, am I in the right one? Yeah, not an API version. Okay, so we were right here. So definitely talked about all these things that we just did. So we added the 2.0 endpoint for pagination. We used the MCP tools in the back end from the chat and alongside the model interactions. We created a new chat server and added it to the application and hooked it up to Gen AI services, which gives an OpenAI compatible endpoint always, no matter what the model is, okay? And we updated the UI to add the chat window and did a lot of cool things there. I did this all with Cursor. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun coding this. I don't get to focus as much on coding as I used to. And I added these interesting rate limits based upon authentication. And I did a lot of that through configuration. And ultimately, I'm able to auto-generate the OpenAPI spec from my API gateway, which is an aggregation of multiple application APIs, right? And it added all those decorations around SSO and rate limiting automatically for me into that spec. And of course, you can do a lot of this yourself. So if you have your own Spring Cloud Gateway today, and you are one of our customers, I have to put that caveat in there, you can actually get access to Spring Enterprise Repo. In there, you notice they're up on start.spring.io, the second favorite site in the world. It actually has some of these SSO and additional traffic control filters that you don't have in open source. And you can actually add those to your application, and you can do this all within your own gateway rather than use our one-on platform, although why wouldn't you use the one-on platform if it already does all the things for you that you need, right? And you can just configure it. So you actually can get access to these if you're a Tanzu customer. Now, some enterprise considerations. Obviously, most of our customers, the biggest thing is single sign-on. How do I hook it up? On platform, this is something that's very straightforward. You create SSO plans that pretty much use OpenID Connect. You can hook up. In the end, it exposes an OpenID Connect endpoint, but behind it, it could be SAML, LDAP, whatever it might be, whatever your current enterprise is using. But that actually can be exposed through an OpenID Connect on platform. And it's just setting up a plan by your operations group. Once you have that plan, on your API gateway, you just reference that plan and say, I want to use the Okta plan and for our company, and it will automatically use it. So single sign-on is really easy. And once you have single sign-on, you can actually mark your different endpoints automatically with SSO enabled. That will automatically redirect them if they aren't already authenticated and they aren't coming with either authorization or other mechanisms to show that they are currently have a bearer token. Then it'll redirect them to the login page. On top of that, you have some other really cool things like claim header available to you at that point. So claim header will take out the JOT token, right? You get a JOT token once you're authenticated fully. And that JOT token is on the API gateway. It's not up on the client, right? So once it's on the gateway, I can actually say, you know what, take out the claim, one of the properties inside that JOT token, take out the value from it and put it in a header. And send that as a header to the proxied service. Instead of sending the whole JOT down, because you could do token relay, send the whole JOT, now they have to unpack it. So you can just send what matters. So in this case, username and user subject, okay? So I'm able to actually send those along as headers now, out of the claims, okay? So there's quite a few other things. You can actually do RBAC. So there's roles, and on the gateway, you would just say which claim represents roles within your organization, and then each route can say, in order to access this particular route, you have to have a certain role within the list of roles that are available. So you can do RBAC automatically with just a filter, scopes as well. And then obviously there's all these different API developer patterns. We talked about aggregation in the first one, right? The API aggregator. We also have lines of business. We had one customer who on the front end, they actually are using SSO, but on their back end, they have like a totally different business unit that their APIs need to call into from the front end in clients. And when they call into it, they're using client certificates. And we do fingerprint and also common name matching to validate that they have a good certificate. And so they use different security models depending upon which API gateway they're going to. And obviously microservices, this is beautiful for that because you can imagine I can actually have one gateway, if you're doing like APIs for partners. For this partner, I might have one API gateway with these 3 microservices exposed through it. And then on this other gateway, I have these other APIs exposed through it to a different partner. This is something that we see with some of our customers as well. And then obviously modernization. This is a big one. I've got some old application monolith and I'm trying to break it down. So I'll put an API gateway in front of it as a facade, and then I will slice and dice the monolith, and I'll take some of the data, some of the app, move it over into a smaller service, and then, but still through the API gateway, it's just one API. And of course, then integrating third parties. We have quite a few doing like Salesforce or Stripe or things like that. And they expose some of those APIs that they create with the third party, COTS application or SaaS, and they expose it through the same API gateway alongside their other custom APIs. Okay. All right, on top of that, there was API gateway, and now I'm done talking. Thank you. And if you haven't, please come and get the cards. Also, check out this site. You want to see some of the other cool stuff from the Spring team. I came to Pivotal back in the day, and now Broadcom through Pivotal. Back in 2015, I was so excited because I remember starting Spring and seeing Rod Johnson back in Java 2006. I'm a very old person. Started Java in the 90s. So, but it was just exciting. And I have to say, working with these folks, you can gain so much knowledge from all of them. Spencer here is amazing what he can do. So please take the time to find him in the hallways and talk to him. Also grab their card. All right?
One more.
Thank you. Oh yeah, one more.
There's the URL of the demo app that I
should
had
put
there.
mine in there too. Oops. All right.
Thanks, folks. It's lunch.